Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of ATTMind Radio. I'm your host, as always, James W. Gesso, and I'm coming to you live from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, or at least on location. I mean, it's obviously pre-recorded, not live, but on location here in Amsterdam, where I'm actually set to do a talk tonight at a smart shop downtown. I don't know if they call it downtown, but in the red light district. And feeling really excited about my tour across Europe, which is continuing. So depending on what time you're listening to it, if it's still the summer of 2016 or the July to August of 2016, you can check out more of the events across Europe by heading to my website, jameswgesso.com/events. Check it out there. But yeah, what I've got for you today is actually an interview with Jef Baker. Jef is from Australia, and this interview was actually recorded on location in Australia, where him and I met up in Sydney. Newtown was the name of the community, like a trendy part. We went up for falafels, we chatted a bit, got the conversational juices flowing, got to know each other, and then hit the record button as we walked from basically the falafel place to the train, where eventually we parted ways. Now, because of this, whoa, if you're watching that on video, that was weird, right? So because of this conversation being on the street, some of it's kind of a bit hard to hear because of background noise. I've done my best to clean it up. I think it's quite good, quite consistent. But in the beginning, there's a lot of human voices around because we're in a park. So the first couple minutes is a bit difficult to hear, but I do promise it gets better. And if you have to listen to it a couple times to really catch what was said, it's probably to your benefit, because some of the stuff that Jef offers in this is absolutely gems, beautiful gems of high value. I don't know what actual gem I will reference, but a gem in general. And also you'll notice that sometimes the conversation jumps a little bit. I've had to cut some pieces out for consistency, for flow, and then also sometimes we had to stop because the background noise was too much. It didn't make sense to keep talking. But again, I feel like the post-production's gone quite well, and that you're going to enjoy this episode. Also, keep listening to the end, because there's an interesting synchronicity that I didn't notice until I was doing the post-production, and maybe you'll catch it, maybe you won't. But introducing Jef. So, Jef is a cultural studies and communications graduate from Southern Cross University. His thesis, A Thread in the Vine, The Deep Ecology of Contemporary Ayahuasca Discourse, played an important role in his rediscovering of the plant medicine path. Jef's research interests are now centered on exploring the ritual aspects of the psychedelic experience and how entheogenic plants inform people's notions of self, agency, identity, and community in postmodernity. A particular focus is the way the integration process is critical in bringing about pragmatic change at the personal, cultural, and social levels. Jef's Facebook page, Entheogenic Anthropology, which is actually how Jef and I became familiar with each other, is also a site where he shares his ongoing interest in the role of psychoactive substances throughout human history. So please enjoy this episode of ATTMind Radio. I'm going to check in with you again at the end with some more updates and stuff. And yeah, here is Jef Baker on ATTMind Radio.
As you listen, keep in mind that though this podcast features medical and other professionals and regularly speaks on the topic of psychoactive substances in a positive light, nothing heard here should ever be taken as medical advice or as encouragement to consume any of the substances mentioned, especially the ones that are blatantly illegal in your country of residence. Listen critically and always check in with yourself before acting based on anything you hear or read on the internet.
All right, so Jef,
James.
what is it that you're studying in school right now?
Well, I just had approval to begin my postgrad, PhD, and my honours was cultural studies and communications, in which I completed my honours thesis with a discourse analysis of the deep ecological themes present in the way ayahuasca is discussed in online forums. So that's brought me to the position now, after some, some insight as to what to do next and then I actually took these issues to ceremony and as to where I was best positioned to, I guess, provide something of value to the larger community, not just the academic community, but entheogen workers. So essentially my focus now is on various aspects of integration. Now what got me interested in this was the way the community seems to be attached to so many other spiritual practices and spiritual traditions. It's extremely hybrid, and some would say there's a certain perennialism to that, which I think is perfectly valid, and there's core truths in all philosophical traditions that tend to shine out and through entheogens. But what I wanted to look at is how practices like meditation and Tai Chi and Qigong act as integrated frameworks. But not only that, how the resolution we get from psychedelic experiences informs our day-to-day actions and how we turn that into actual real pragmatic change. So not just the internal personal change we feel, but how we show it to others. Yeah, and I could go much further there.
Yeah, okay, so I'm really wanting to pick your brain on what you mean by how we take the psychedelic experience and bring it into the way we show up for others, because I think that's, as you heard me mention in my talk here the other night, that's what I consider to be one of the three primary areas of personal growth, which is the interpersonal realm, and the most essential one, I think, for us in the psychedelic community, which tends to be a little bit too focused often on the personal work and the transpersonal work, but not so much the community development, the community presence in and out of the ceremony. But before we go to that, you said that you were studying the ecological themes that were emerging in the online discourse around ayahuasca. What were some of the patterns that you found?
Okay, it's been a little while since I was doing that, so refresh my internal memory. I guess firstly what drew me to that was many experiences with mescaline when I was a teenager, and as you know, the mescaline opens you up to the interconnectedness of the external world. Makes it starkly visible.
Very mild experience with mescaline, which is just recently the San Pedro cactus. Are you talking about San Pedro?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so when I started to read about ayahuasca all the time, one of the things that struck me most resonantly and seemed to be really prominent in the discourse was, I guess, the reference to Gaia, but the reference to Mother Earth and the sentience in nature. And that was something I'd felt profoundly and really wanted to tease out as a key aspect and a key sort of facet of what people see, or part of the, I suppose, the diamond that attracts people to ayahuasca. It seemed to be a very large facet in that.
So the reconnection with the earth.
Yes, absolutely.
As a primary thing, driving force.
But the way that ayahuasca is spoken about in terms of discourse shapes its perception culturally.
Right, of course. It's establishing the cultural set.
And again, there's context to that, and that people going to Peru and having deep, strong medicine in the jungle are going to be so much more open and receptive to that natural world connectedness than, say, sitting ceremony just outside a large city. And I found one of the easiest ways to analyse discourse was through online forums. And here it was, the ayahuasca.com forum, where people had been discussing these things for a decade. And it was absolute trove of dialogue to draw out particular themes.
So, did you find that is there like a synonymous theme? Is there a harmony amongst the larger online ayahuasca discourse community, or is there conflict in perspective? And if there is conflict in perspectives, what did you find, if you can tease out that information?
Interesting.
As the primary conflicts within the grander discourse.
Yeah, because I really didn't have space to include that in the write-up of the research, but when you get to this sort of idea that everything's on course, everything's on track, that Gaia has a plan that is all part of the grander unfolding.
Which is one of the themes that you noticed.
Yes. Yeah. But that can also run counter to a certain kind of, well, does that therefore allow an apathy? Do we not then have an obligation to not pollute, because it's all part of, we're all one and we're all part of the cosmic organism? Then what does it matter what we do?
Right. So that was one of the conflicts. Was there? I guess now it's like a question of free will, and if there's free will and there isn't a destiny, there isn't a fate that's already set for us, then we have a level of personal responsibility to put agency behind our choices and behind the type of world that we want to see. But if everything's predetermined,
we give over that agency to some
higher
larger power that is detached from us, and therefore that we are not accountable to. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of paradox at play there. The main framework,
Wait, hang tight.
Sure.
So that got you thinking.
So the main framework to draw out these themes became the philosophy of deep ecology, developed by George Sessions and Art Ness. And the fundamental premise behind deep ecology is that given the right opportunity and the right understandings, people will inherently do the right thing. But the qualifier is that as opposed to shallow ecology, which is just, a carbon tax or, a this and a that, a sort of stopgap band-aid measure.
It's it's legislative rather than revolutionary.
Absolutely. And so deep ecology is entirely about connecting to the value of non-human life as an inherent right in itself, that all things have equal right, even though rights can be a human construct, but as it's understood in the framework, all things have equal right to live, to exist. So, it's a rather metaphysical way of looking at ecological issues. But the reason being is that and this is how it intersects with entheogens and ayahuasca so beautifully, is that when you come from a place of feeling interconnectedness, not just understanding it, then your motives, again, what I was saying before about sort of the psychedelic lens, is that when you're integrating the lessons from an experience, it starts to inform the way you see everything. So you start to understand the consequences of your dietary choices on the environment and so forth.
That ties into what we were talking about in the restaurant we were just in, about how psychedelic experiences, when we really give them the space and the reverence to exist in their fullness, they become some of the most formative experiences of our lives.
Absolutely.
And fundamentally alter our paradigms.
But if we don't actually enact that, it just becomes an alteration of perception. those forms of experiences have to become an alteration of action, not just an alteration of perception. Because otherwise, you know, what is it for? What are we doing to improve ourselves and ourselves alone? Or do we want to improve the lives of others around us? I mean, I see it very much, and this is one of the themes as well that came out, as the interconnections with indigenous philosophy as part of a type of perennialism. In that, it came from my partner. She said, what good is going drinking ayahuasca, you know, every other month if it doesn't change your life?
Right.
And that really, you know, as simple as that sounded, it really sort of stuck deep with me. And, you know, you can change your internal mode of being in the world, but unless you change your external mode, all you're doing is altering your perception of reality.
Right. I like this idea that if we go into the psychedelic experience and we don't come out and make changes to the context of our lives, all we're altering is our perception of the things that we've always been doing.
Which is what the reductive view would say, is, you know, they're just, you know, all these things, they're just drugs, they just alter your perception. They're nothing more. They're not spiritual tools, they're not this, they're not that. And so we're kind of, in a little way, maybe, buying into the very reductionism we're trying to counter.
Right, interesting. You know, I think this is one of the things that is most fundamentally missing from a lot of people utilizing psychedelics, is allowing it to alter, like really alter the way you show up in your world, which requires the people around you to have a clarity as to what it is that you are doing, and to offer you the space, that is to say, to offer you permission to be someone different, so that you can actually create those changes. Because oftentimes, and this is something...
sorry.
I was going to say, this is something that Sebastian mentioned last night at my talk, which was that the cultures around psychedelics, entheogens in the Western world make it so it's so shamed and demonized that people aren't really given an opportunity to really make those changes. And so a lot of the benefits of the psychedelics are lost in the integration, because we don't get to be seen for those things.
And particularly, as you said, what's really important in those 5 key people in your life is to have someone that understands the psychedelic experience that you're going through, or at least can relate.
And you know, especially for me, like especially the people who their understanding really count for you, you know, like the people who you look to for like your healthy attachments and support. Bonding and support. Because if you go to a therapist, for example, and you're going to a therapist because you're facing alcoholism, which you inherited, say, from your father or your mother who is an alcoholic, right? And that person's never touched a drop of alcohol in their life, you know, how much help can they really be for you?
Then people would make the argument that you don't need to have cancer to study cancer. But you're in a clinical laboratory environment, you're not in an interpersonal environment. So I think that's where you could sort of, you know, knock that one in the head a little bit.
Yeah, well, the same people that are saying you don't need to have cancer to study cancer are the people who haven't cured cancer yet.
Very true. You're
not making any negative claims, or to throw the argument on its head. Because for myself,
when I was writing my thesis on ayahuasca, I hadn't drunk. And I understand on a personal level that was part of my journey back to psychedelic work. But also it can give you, I'd like to say, objective points, and particularly now with my new research and this huge project I'm going to be starting soon rather than later. Is that it's informed by my own process of integration, and this is sort of, it's a self-reflexive process. As I work through integration methods and techniques and issues, I kind of get a little hint of what to look for elsewhere. Right. But again, what Sebastian was saying was that it can also sort of be a slight impediment in that your perspective is constantly changing.
Right.
Through the work.
Oh, as in the more times you show up to the psychedelic experience, like for you with ayahuasca, each time it slightly shifts.
Yes.
So it's like,
as soon as you think you know it, it shifts and it becomes something else. In order that you may never trap it and pin it down.
Yeah, you're trying to map the rabbit hole, but all the while you're going deeper in it.
Absolutely, yeah, that's really close, yeah. And so, I guess I was saying before when you mentioned, those important relationships in your life, and many people may come back from a very deep ayahuasca experience, or any entheogenic experience, and see that they need to change the relationships in their lives. And that can be one of the most profoundly difficult things to do, or change their jobs, or make drastic change.
Right, because they've got that change in perspective, right?
But to actually
everyone
make
else around
real
them doesn't
change,
have that change
to become congruent with that new perspective, if you're not integrating properly, the further away from the say peak experience you get, the harder it becomes. It's like there's this window immediately after, be that days, weeks, months, where change is ripe for the picking. It's ripe for the creation. Your neuroplasticity, say, is very malleable, and the ability to lay down new patterns is right there. It's like the Norman Deutsch's book, The Brain That Changed Itself, and he uses the analogy of a fresh powdered field of snow, a slope. And when you're young, you learn a particular path until you take this run. And as you keep taking that, it digs a groove deeper and deeper and deeper till you can no longer take any other path. That's what the psychedelic experience does, is wipes that whole slope fresh again. And suddenly you're standing at the top, able to take any infinite number of equally effective and efficient paths, which is great, but then you have to choose which one. It might take you a few to work out which one's the best.
Right, and the ones that had those grooves originally are still present to groove back into easier.
Because you remember them. Yeah, it's pattern behaviour. And interesting, one of the questions that came up last night is, what is the role of visual pattern in the mushroom experience?
Right.
Yeah, and that was interesting. There's not a lot of research on it other than the purely neurological.
Right.
But I've always thought it is that patterning again. It's interconnectedness, because pattern is interconnectedness. So it's like a tabula rasa, a blank slate of pattern to help our own processing of behaviour pattern. It sort of eases the process or allows them to be seen on a conceptual level, because there's pattern being seen at a visual level. Does that make sense?
Interesting. So we're drawing all sorts of patterns, like what you're saying is that our pattern recognition is enhanced.
Yes.
And so as we're drawing patterns internally from different aspects of ourselves to our external context, we're also perceiving more patterns visually in our environment, as well as an extension of the same increase for pattern recognition. Absolutely, yeah, and I think that the visual pattern recognition helps in the processing of the conceptual pattern. It acts as as like a feedback loop.
Yes, absolutely.
Or
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I definitely feel that the external environment works as a referencing point for how we direct our internal environment, and then the internal environment amplifies what we're perceiving in the external environment, sort of utilizing external cues to draw together a significance and a meaning formed internally, especially with mushrooms. We spoke of earlier that the hierarchical flow of external stimuli to conception, or concept, is altered, and so concept starts to be pushed out onto the external world, the inner contents go outwards. So how does that work, say, with 5 grams of Sign of Darkness? Or for me, the reason I really like ayahuasca is because the setting is taken care of. There's I'm looked after, I'm in a safe space. There's sort of this structure of diet to help you sort of focus your intentions and your set, but in a completely entoptic visionary state. Does that mean so say in darkness, where the external reference point is gone, does that mean that particular model is just switched off? No. I would say that you're just not getting the external environment is no longer a trigger or a cue for what's going to emerge out of your internal environment, out of your subconscious.
Okay, so if there's no external reference point anymore, then what does the internal experience feed off?
Just the internal experience.
Okay.
Like it feeds off itself. I mean that's kind of hard to determine, but yeah, I mean you mentioned that the visual patterns that you're seeing work as a reference to forming patterns conceptually or emotionally.
From essentially an unprocessed one, because you're not drawing meaning from the pattern; it's just pattern.
Interesting. Well, I honestly,
it's extremely visually stimulating and aesthetically ecstatic. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. So I think it clearly has a function.
Yeah, I'm not sure where my comments lie on the function of those patterns, but on the premise
we're
of
speculating.
Extreme levels of speculation here.
It's always fun to do.
In regards to like being in the darkness, and being referenced primarily by your internal environment. I mean, there's so much content happening there, but when we are having external stimuli, then our internal content is being modified and modulated and influenced by our external stimuli, and when it goes
you have
away,
to be very careful what external stimuli you put in that space.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. Which leads into the whole concepts of ceremony, ritual, intentional space setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I really feel has incredible value. And as I mentioned last night, something I feel the mushrooms could really benefit from. Like I see so many people approaching mushrooms very casually because they're easily accessible. They're easily culturally accessible, sort of financially accessible. They're ecologically accessible. You know, it's like how many thousands must just die in the field during the season, just go to waste. I mean, it feels to me like the mushrooms are very ancient. The Western culture, they're very new and full of potential, whereas ayahuasca already has a sort of culture shaped around it. We have this sort of opportunity to shape a new culture.
Which I know
and you're a
very
big part
intimately,
of it, yeah.
Right, yeah.
But to bring those structures that we've come to understand work very well in ayahuasca space to mushrooms. Now you mentioned the Ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca.
Yeah. I don't know. I was going to ask you about that.
Well, I've never done it. I experimented once with harmine extract, and the thing is, like, the context was not really in a place where I could assess the nuances. I didn't have enough of either thing, and then that same day I dislocated my shoulder, so it was like, I wasn't really in a space to tease out the nuances, right? But I know there's a man in the Netherlands that does work with this.
He calls it Psychedelic. I had an interview with whose podcast it was. Yeah,
he was on Martin Ball's. Yeah.
But yeah, this is, and I recall this coming up, I think, in your interview with Benton Rooks.
Okay.
About the sort of mythos around ayahuasca. Although it's sort of hybrid as it is, and as sort of traditional as it is at the same time, it seems very hard to kind of create something out of nowhere. Because I mean, the only sort of connections we have to mushroom culture are prehistoric ones,
right?
Prehistory, or the master texts and Gordon Wasson.
Right, and then Gordon Wasson's research is not so
he's a contentious figure as well.
Yeah. There's debate there.
Discourses around the man himself,
and then even the current usage of it in Mexico. Like I know that there's more happening there, but the only really expose that I've seen of what it looks like now in Mexico is the Little Saints documentary, Olive and Quintanilla, and it's extremely Christian. I mean, I have a podcast with him where he talked about why it is likely that that this indigenous belief system took up all these different saints and deities into their work as a way of protecting themselves from being murdered by the Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, absolutely, and it's inseparable from the process of colonization. And cultural imperialism. But I guess the idea of creating mushroom culture comes back to what we were talking about showing up, but not just showing up as co-creating. And it's like we're at a point where we have the opportunity to be very careful about what we do introduce and what we choose to take from other cultures with respect, and how we apply that. I just think there's this huge potential there to allow people approaching mushrooms to do it in safe, contained environments where they can truly process and to develop support networks through that, because that seems to be one of the big things, and it's partly what got Samara started, was as a support network for integration, for helping people, post-ceremony support, but also as a way of bringing people that might be having difficult issues into a sense of community.
So I was like, I'll just leave it here.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. That, like I said during my talk last night, that maybe I said it afterwards actually to one of the guys I was writing back to the place I was staying with, is that I feel it really important that what I'm doing is not just about, like the book tour. It's about going into cities and having a public event that says, hey, there's a discussion happening about the mature use of psychedelics.
Absolutely. I think that's incredibly inspiring to people that have an interest in psychedelics and don't sort of realize that there is not only sort of a global culture as disconnected as that may be, or as connected as it may be, but it introduces people to the field of academics that has been hugely important in validating the spiritual, the psycho-spiritual, the transpersonal import of these substances.
Yeah, and it also brings those people together under the same roof.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everybody that's there knows that everyone else that's there is at least savvy to, at the very least, what was just talked about, which gives it a space for you to talk comfortably about your experience.
It's like lifting taboos. It's taking stigma off that people may have felt, and particularly, again, like not having people that they can talk to about their experience,
which hampers the integration process.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, in Decomposing the Shadow, I make a mention about integrating and talking to others, and one of the comments that I made is that if you can't talk openly about, say, mushrooms, I had this experience in mushrooms that offered me this insight, right? Because as soon as someone says mushrooms, then
the walls go up.
Oh yeah, that those are drugs. Those perspectives clearly aren't real, or whatever the hell. But what I say is that you don't have to mention where it came from to embody wisdom.
Insight. Yeah.
The insight was yours. Mentioning this one time I was on mushrooms, I had this insight, right?
And it's not being deceptive. It's just being selective and being
discerning,
appropriate. Yeah, discerning. Yeah. Reading the situation, I guess.
So I want to jump back on this idea of having people around you that you can talk to, and the bonding being a really important aspect of that. People that you.
So I think that's a big part of how community is built.
Yeah, our bonding through vulnerable experiences. Yeah, shared vulnerable. Yeah, and so I had this realization several years ago, where I was seeing a woman, and I was very much in love with her, and she wasn't really into psychedelics that much, and I really was, and it's something that previously I've felt sort of I guess ashamed of.
Really?
What I'm about to say to you, not what I just said.
Oh, okay.
That's something that I felt remorseful about my actions, is that I remember there was a few times that we took psychedelics together that was not so much because she was really into the idea, but she was doing it for me because it was important for me, and I kind of like pushed it.
Okay.
And I remember this one night we were in sort of an argument about her not wanting to take this, this particular substance. It wasn't in the immediacy, it was more the idea of taking it together. And it was getting really heated, and at one point I kind of broke down, and I was like, I just need to know that I'm with somebody who understands what it's like.
Yeah.
And that was a huge opening for me. That was like, I I can't be with another person who doesn't understand what this is like, because it has been so formative into who I am that there's this fundamental point of relation that we could never share.
Yes, I have a very similar experience. I'm in a very similar situation, yet there's so many other parts of my life that, while psychedelics informs them, are not directly affected by whether I have psychedelics or not. And that's, my family, my work, all of those sort of critical key aspects of your life.
Yeah, I mean, for me at the time, I was in my early 20s, like mid 20s. I was like, that was a huge thing. And also, I mean, like the very paradigm in which I see the world, and the way that I relate to others, the way that I show up to my relationships, is formed very heavily by what I learned, in particular with psilocybin.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, and I'm really hoping that this interview is going to actually sound good with all the crazy traffic on our walk here.
Yeah, I have to tell.
But you mentioned the role of integration. Now, we've been talking about the role of having someone that you can talk to, and having people that can see you in that, which is, I know every time I meet someone who goes, yeah, I went to the jungle, I drank ayahuasca in the jungle, it's like all of a sudden, oh, cool, can we talk, please?
Yeah, you feel it, yeah.
Yeah, but it's, you also mentioned the role of meditative practices, like you said Qigong, and you mentioned a couple other things.
Even surfing, bushwalking. I mean, I for me personally, I find those equally as valuable as meditation. I mean, there's a traditional indigenous practice, the deity, which it has sort of dual meaning. It means a deep listening, and which is used as deep listening as a healing process, just being present and listening. But it also applies to being in nature. Well, for me, my interpretation of it anyway, I might be getting the original context a little bit wrong. But I find when you're out in a natural environment where you cannot hear any industrialized noise, and I don't like to draw this boundary between nature and culture, because it's very fluid.
Yeah.
But when you're in purely natural environment, when you spend an hour and a half, 2 hours just sitting, your auditory perception shifts radically. Your visual perception shifts radically, but for me, it's the auditory perception. I notice patterns and layers in the sound start to emerge, and it's just a being present in nature and listening to what it has to say.
Mm-hmm. This reminds me of.
And you get it in the surf, you get it in the bush.
Yeah, like the sound of the waves.
Yeah, and the sound of the waves is almost like the speed of your breath in a meditative state. Like, one of my favourite things to do with San Pedro was take it on the beach at night, alone. It allows the internal visionary state, more so at high doses, allows a very, very deep visionary state, sort of akin to the level of ayahuasca, but very different in sort of visual topography and structure. But that sound of the waves is just a steady ebb and flow. It's just an anchor. Much the way that, say, sound and music operates in an ayahuasca ceremony. Mm-hmm. Sort of anchors the time and space together and fuses a constantly weaving reference point that sort of anchors you to the space. So that some would say your spirit doesn't get lost.
Right, yeah, some of the most deliriating experiences I've had with psychedelics were when I was in soundless environments.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of which was actually outside, but if you ever happen to take any type of psychedelic and be in a meditative place when you're surrounded by thick layers of snow, even if you're in the city or a city park, it's like almost like blistering silence sometimes.
Right. Eerie.
Yeah.
Because there's not many places which you can get pure silence. It's very hard to... You think, you get out of the city, you find a silent space. Well, no, pure silence is very, very, very rare.
Yeah.
And that might be one of the few places when there's no wind, there's no insects, there's no, sound of animals.
This is something that I think it's a treasured gift that that the winter offers, that not having a winter doesn't offer, is this opportunity to be in a place of real silence because of the snow. Just really absorbs all this extra sound, and it's a secret gift too, in the sense that you have to stop and listen to hear the silence.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if you're not stopping and listening, all you hear is gonna
people stomping around in it.
Yeah. Or yourself stomping around in it.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I had an experience going for a hike in the mountains, and we had some psilocybin mushrooms. This was some time ago, and we'd hike, and just all we hear is conk, conk, conk in the snow, and then we'd stop for a second. And then there would be this moment of what seemed like silence, but then it was almost as if it were just a temporary silence as we shifted between the sound we were creating and the sound of water melting and dripping and birds. And there was a noticeable threshold, like a liminal space of one sound, our created sound, fading out, and the other sounds just coming in full force and creating this extremely dynamic sound environment around us. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that talk with Jef. As you can see, if you're watching this on video, I am still on location in Amsterdam, and I didn't listen to the entire interview between the intro and the outro video. It's about a 5-second difference, about as long as it took me to hit stop and hit record a second time. But again, I thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please go check out more of Jef's stuff. Check out Entheogenic Anthropology, and you can head to check out the show notes on jameswjesso.com for this episode and get links to his other work and different ways you can connect directly with him. And if you really enjoyed the show, please help spread it around. If you share it with somebody else, word of mouth is really the best promotion. So please tell somebody, share it on whatever social media you care to do so, and kind of help spread what this podcast is offering to the other people who might possibly benefit from the value you perceive in it and the value they might perceive in it. And in doing so, if you'd like to help fund this free podcast and basically offering a little special, like, hey, I like this, I like that you're doing it, and I like that I receive value from it, and I'd like to directly reciprocate that value in a explicit support of the various costs, time and financial, that goes into making it, you can head over to my Patreon page, which will be linked here in the YouTube videos as well as in the show notes, or you could go to jameswjesso.com/support and you get links to it there. Patreon is a platform that allows direct support between content creators like myself and content enjoyers like yourself, and it does so by creating a pledge of some very, very reasonable and minimal amount, where each increased denomination of amount that you choose to pay per episode, or say volunteer or gift per episode, increases a set of rewards or possibilities that would be offered to you as one of my patrons. But yeah, $2 an episode, $1 an episode. This is incredibly helpful. Even though it seems like nothing, it is really quite helpful. So consider doing that as well. And once again, thank you for listening to ATTMind Radio, and I look forward to checking in with you on the next episode. Take care.